It's on its way, boys. Path of Exile 2, the Third Edict, is coming in a little over a week, and I'm here to give you a quick rundown on some of the new content coming and changes to existing systems. The reveal itself was incredibly dense in information. It was an hour long, and if you want all the fine details, I'd highly recommend checking it out there. I will discuss some of the bigger changes coming, as well as my thoughts on the approach Grinding Games are taking to the development of Path of Exile 2, because I think after Dawn of the Hunt, they learned a few things. So let's jump in with some of the big new additions to the game. Starting first with the campaign changes. So we're getting Act 4, I cannot believe it. Act 4 will take you to the Krui archipelago. There you'll first return to King's March and then choose your destination. Act 4, we're being told, is completely non-linear. You choose your own path, you'll be shown a bunch of different islands, and then you choose which ones you want to go to. A little similar to Act 2, where you can kind of travel to the locations you want to travel to in any order. It'll be interesting to see how quests are handled here. I expect each island to maybe have its own quests, and then maybe bring you together for a final kind of push at the end, but well, that'll remain to be seen. And then following Act 4, we no longer have cruel difficulty. We now have 3 what they're calling interlude acts. These are designed to bridge the gap between Act 4 and the endgame, and get you to about level 65. Once we get Acts 5 and 6 in the future, these interlude acts will no longer exist, and these stories may disappear entirely, so this might be the only chance you actually get to experience these stories. We're not 100% sure if they're going to make it into Act 5 and 6. Obviously the bosses, the areas, the enemies you see in this place will make it into those acts, but the stories themselves might change. So the 3 interlude acts are called The Curse of Halton, The Stolen Buyer, and Doyani's Contingency. Essentially, you'll be returning to what will look like Act 1 in The Curse of Halton, what will look like Act 2 in The Stolen Buyer, and then what will look like kind of Act 3 in Doyani's Contingency, although Doyani's Contingency has you going through the mountains to find a vault of Val that had previously been locked up in there to help them escape the Cataclysm. Each of these interlude acts will have about 6 to 7 areas each and about 4 boss fights each, so about 12 in total. And Act 4 as well will have 16 new areas, 12 new bosses, and 100 new monster types. An insane amount of content, and I love that we're no longer going to be just repeating Acts 1 through 3 on cruel difficulty. I'm so glad to see that we're going to have some actual meaty content to sink our teeth into. And as we're exploring those new Act 4 islands, we have the ability to sprint around them. So if you take a wrong turn, you can turn right back around and sprint your way back to the start. Sprinting is coming to an ARPG. It's coming to Path of Exile. This one I really didn't expect, but I think it's quite an elegant solution they've come up with. So after the patch, you'll be able to hold down your dodge roll button or key. This will make you roll, and then you'll take off straight into a sprint. And we've been told that sprint is essentially faster than any other monster in the game, so you should be able to outrun anything chasing you. We saw them use this to roll out of trouble and then run away from an engagement that wasn't going too well. But there is the caveat here. You can't just sprint around willy-nilly. If you're sprinting and you get hit by an enemy, it will put you into a knocked down state, very similar to when you block too much and then it puts you down. You don't want to fall down. The monsters will get you. They will overwhelm you if you go down. But this is going to be incredibly helpful for those of you going through the campaign for your first time, or those of us in the endgame as well, where you might be clearing an endgame map and then realize you left a rare on the other side. This will mean you can sprint right back to them. And if you are in the sprint animation, simply casting an ability or a skill will pull you out of that sprint. So if you're running, an enemy pops up on screen, all you need to do is smash a key, smash whatever ability you normally use, and instantly you'll run out of the sprint. This is just like a really nice quality of life change, and it doesn't stop there. It pales in comparison to what we're about to cover. We're going to touch on support gems and then talk about skills. So with support gems, they are removing the 1 support gem per character limit. You can now use the same support gem across every single skill in your character if it makes sense. The reason they're doing this is because when they first implemented the 1 support per character rule, they thought it was going to help players diversify their builds, but it had the opposite effect. Instead, they found players who were putting their best supports on a single skill and then building their entire character around that skill. That's not what Grinding Games have wanted for Path of Exile 2. They've wanted you to look at combos, look at multiple skills. So now they're reverting that. So let's say you've got the fork support. You can now throw that on every single skill if you want to. This will open up more options. You'll have more options to spread your damage out across multiple skills instead of really relying on one or two to make the bulk of your impact. On top of that, they're also removing the 3 tiers and we're moving to 5. So instead of having 1, 2, and 3 tiers, you'll now have up to 5. And you'll also have different levels to the same support gems, which we haven't had in the past. So one of the examples they gave was the double barrel support, which at level 1 hinders you with 30% less reload speed while loading additional bolts, but at level 2 gives you 20% less reload speed. And then at level 3 gives you an entirely new aspect to the support, automatically reloading bolts when the player heavy stuns enemies. So they're really mixing up with the way supports work. This change I really like. I think it's going to add a lot of variety to builds. I actually supported the 1 support gem per character idea, but it just didn't work in practice. So I'm really glad that Grinding Games are taking on that player feedback and actually making the changes. And if that wasn't enough, we're now going to be receiving lineage supports. These are brand new support gems. They were almost discussed like unique supports, like there are unique items. These are kind of unique support gems. And you'll find these that start to drop in the regular drop pool in the end game, and some of them will be target farmed. So certain bosses, certain pinnacle content will have lineage supports that are specific to them. These can be build defining, they can really heavily augment skills, or have just straight damage impacts like a lot of supports do. But these are going to be very unique, and they're going to be some really interesting builds that come out of these. I can't wait to see all of the different lineage support options here. But leaving support gems, let's move into skills. And this is where, if you want the full details, again, you'll have to check out the video. Basically, what they've done here is they've aimed a lot of these changes at quality of life improvements that are removing gameplay disruptions, buff aspects of the game, and simplify some gameplay systems, which will make more sense as I talk to these. But essentially, they've taken a pass at every single class, really targeted changes at those classes, like improving how crossbow reload and skills work for the mercenary, or shields for the warrior and huntress, while also making other changes to aspects like evasion and armor. So let's quickly dive into those. They're making changes to evasion. Evasion now has a new mechanic called deflect. So to address evasion feeling weak and the fact that evasion does nothing to protect against unblockable attacks and slams, they've added deflect, which gives you a chance to deflect an attack, preventing 40% of its damage. This deflection stat can be changed with items, and you'll begin to see stats relating to this on items as well as nodes on the passive tree, and both deflection and evasion roll together. So you'll roll evasion. If evasion fails, you'll then roll deflection. If deflection hits, you'll then prevent 40% of that damage, or if you've upped your deflection stat, you can actually deflect up to 100% of the damage if you really build for it. Remember though, that's deflecting if the deflect roll actually works. So it's 100% negation of the damage, but only if your deflect roll works, and that's assuming the evade misses itself. So this is going to be a massive boon to every class that focuses on evasion as its main primary attribute. And it doesn't stop there. Moving over to the warrior and our armor users, they have made change to accuracy and armor as it impacts your close range melee fighters. So talking about accuracy first, accuracy was intended to be a stat warriors didn't need, and it was causing a lot of frustration when missing attacks when you were basically on top of enemies. So now, if you're in melee range as a warrior or anyone, you don't need to worry about accuracy. You have a much higher chance to hit when you're in close combat. So if you're in melee swing range, you're almost certainly going to hit that. And for armor, they've added stats to armor that allows it to negate portions of elemental damage with stats found on armor and in the passive tree. So no longer is armor just about physical. You can now work towards building it to also negate portions of elemental damage, really helping you feel tanky, because let's be honest, in the end game, having a hell of a lot of armor doesn't do that much for you, because the elemental damage is ultimately what generally gets you. And while we're on the topic of armor, let's talk shields and parrying. They discussed that shielding and parrying felt kind of bad at times because it wasn't always clear what attacks were blockable. Certain attacks couldn't be blocked, certain spells couldn't be blocked. They're now changing that. Now, every attack, every damaging ability can be blocked or parried, with the only exception being some of the red unblockable boss moves. So when bosses kind of turn red, they have their unblockable moves. Those can't be blocked, those can't be parried, but everything else in the game can now be blocked and parried, providing much more consistency to the process of moving through the campaign, mapping, and fighting mobs. You no longer have to worry, is this thing coming at me blockable? Just go for the block itself. So that is a massive boon to those classes. Anyone's using a shield to block or parry. The only downside to this is they are slightly reducing the passive block chance. So you will feel a little weaker in that respect. But if you're using a shield, it should be much easier to just block attacks in general. So overall, this should be a boon for those who like to use the active block ability. Now, looking into skills, I'm going to really briefly cover this. Again, this was a 20-minute really information-dense segment in their reveal. So if you're really interested in skills, check that out because nobody's going to be able to summarize that well and do it justice. But essentially, I'll talk to a few things. They're adding brand new skills for a few different classes, and they are revamping and overhauling the way a lot of skills work for classes. So looking at each class very briefly, the Ranger, they talked about improving cold and poison skills. They're actually adding a brand new poison skill. But the changes I really want to focus on here is to changes like toxic growth, right? So they're improving movement as it's tied to skills. Toxic growth previously would jump you into the air. They've completely removed that jump because let's be honest, it wasn't really all that helpful. And then for other skills like electrocuting arrow, they've changed how it functions so it can now benefit from projectile and AoE support gems. Essentially, they're trying to remove the small intricate details in the game that kind of feel bad. So again, the movement tied to certain skills that really don't need it, the blocks that weren't really landing when they wanted. For the mercenary, they're reducing the movement speed penalty on reloading, and they're overall removing movement speed penalties as they relate to abilities. For weapon switching, they've completely removed the delay. There was a very small delay, but they've completely removed the delay when you are switching weapons. So you can see their focus on all of these skill changes has been to remove some of the bloat. It's been to remove some of the jank, essentially. Some of the things that slow you down or feel a bit odd in the moment, they're looking to remove those. But they're also revamping a ton of systems, and again, you'll have to check it out. They've added some great new things to the monk. They've added the hollow palm technique, which brings us a true unarmed monk build, letting you use all quarterstaff abilities with no items in either hand, and instead buffing your physical damage, your attack speed, and your crit chance based on various things. So you'll get more attack speed based on how much evasion you have, more crit chance based on your energy shield, and more physical damage based on the skill level. I know there's one person in my community which was really hanging out for that, so it's incredible to see it coming. For the Witch, they're trying to make Zoomancer style builds work. They're trying to make mixed minion builds work. They were seeing that people would stick to one minion type. They're trying to change that. And to do that, they've given things like the Brute its own active skill, so it now shatters frost on enemies as well as allies. And to complement that, they've given the Frost Mage a new ability that gives ice armor to all minions, which can also then be shattered by the Brute. So they're trying to bring in that interplay. And wildly enough, they've taken another pass at Spectres. So Spectres are now going to have lower costs and higher damage. Obviously, Spectre versus Spectre is going to be slightly different, but they are making some changes there. And the last one I'll touch on is the Sorceress. The Sorceress is having some new powers given to them. They will now be able to use elemental infusions. So if I use a frost spell, that could leave a frost infusion on the ground. I can then pick that up, and then if I cast a lightning spell, it can be infused with that frost and have new different abilities. In one case, we saw them infused with all these different elements, and we saw fire, ice, and lightning all coming down at the same time. It looked absolutely incredible, and it's going to really add some interesting play to how the Sorceress functions. Now, I know I've already said it, but guys, that section was so information dense. Please check out the full reveal for all of the changes there, because covering them, it would blow this video completely out. Alongside the skill and support changes, we're then going to be seeing some changes to the passive skill tree. The short version is here essentially they've added about 150 new nodes. This includes some keystones as well as your basic nodes. And they are overall reducing the attribute requirements on items by about 25% to give you more space to focus on interesting passive skill options and spend less time simply trying to gain your various attributes like strength, dex, or intelligence. So we're seeing some big passive skill tree changes. The passive skill tree is going to look quite different. It's going to open up new build options. It's going to make it a bit more interesting for you and should ultimately provide a little bit more freedom in builds as well as choice with all of the new options there. Now, moving on to some of the new content, the League, the Abyss League. We're getting Rise of the Abyssal, which is the first official league for Path of Exile 2. Anyone from Path of Exile 1 is going to remember this league, and ultimately, it functions in pretty much the same way. So you'll first encounter Abyssal monsters in Act 1. As you move through areas, you'll find fissures that lead to pits, As you kill monsters, the fissures in the area will begin to close, opening the pit, causing even more abyssal enemies to appear, as well as the dangerous, rare, or unique monsters. Killing packs near those fissures, so killing the normal packs near them, will result in the pit spitting out a monster of the equal rarity. So if you kill magic mobs will appear from the pit. If you kill a rare will appear from the pit, with some of the same modifiers and potentially tweaked to be abyssal modifiers. And this also extends to things like rogue exiles, monsters trapped in essences, and even bosses, each being consumed by the pit on death and spawning a new enemy in its place with greater risk and of course rewards to be gained from that. Closing a pit can then reward you with abyssal troves, a little chest full of goods, or a dark domain entrance which leads to an underground abyssal city. This is going to be rarer than finding a trove and is more likely to be more of an endgame activity, and in those locations you'll fight a lot of different abyssal enemies and rares with their own special abyssal modifiers, and even more modifiers that are called Lichborn modifiers. There'll be some really tough rares in there, and killing the final rare will also give you access to additional troves, and they have their own unique drops. The unique drop shown off was a lineage support, so again, one of those support gems that is only available through that mechanic. Now, in the end game, you'll then also see abyssal commanders in special areas, special like spires, and they can drop some unique jewels and other goodies as well. So there's a ton coming with this league. Everyone that's played Abyss will know exactly what to expect. It's a really fun league. It's just a lot of monsters to chew through, and there's going to be some really interesting drops that come with this. And there are some new item modifications that can come from this as well. So you can find ancient bones. Using those, you can put a special modifier on your items. You then have to go to a certain location, which we'll find in Act 2, at which point you can uncover that. If you played Path of Exile 1 and you know the syndicate mechanic where you have special syndicate mods and you uncover them, it's the same kind of process. You put the mod on, you go to see what you can uncover, and then you get to select from one of 3 mods, which will then be attached to the weapon. So it's very much deterministic and your choice in a lot of cases. From there, let's talk a bit about endgame. We'll be seeing 25 new maps added to the endgame, which will be capturing a lot of those new locations, enemies, and bosses that we'd be seeing in the campaign, adding even more variety to that grind. We're going to be seeing some more unique interactions in the endgame, so that includes some new locations like Wild Sandstorms, Water Maelstroms, and Val Vaults, which require you to clear nearby maps, finding keys, activating switches, or what have you, to enable access to those specific unique maps for their respective rewards. Those maps will have a lot of the bosses from the interlude acts, and they'll be pinnacle versions of those bosses, and they'll have their own unique drop pool as well, including some of those lineage supports, so those are going to be good to farm. And we're seeing some changes to how waystones are done. So we're going back to the Path of Exile 1 method. Grinding Gear Games are removing the current implementation and returning to what we saw there. So instead of what we have now, where certain affixes add pros and certain affixes add cons, it'll now be every affix increases the difficulty of that waystone, and as a result they are reducing the overall difficulty of those affixes, so it's more in line because you'll now have all of them being negative instead of some negative, some positive. And then on top of that, as you add each modifier, the rarity and the pros that we'll get out of that map will increase. So you'll get more drops chance, you get more item rarity, and more mob spawns. And the last point on the endgame is they are smoothing out the level curve. So now it'll be easier to get into those early 90s levels, and of course they're adding a few new endgame uniques as well. Oh, it's been a lot, I know. We're almost at the end. So 2 more things to talk about, crafting and trade. First up, crafting. Here, we're going to be seeing changes to things like essences as well as basic currencies. So essences, they're making a bit more deterministic. They'll now tell you exactly what they're going to do, and they're going to be used a lot more like regal orbs. So they will upgrade a magic to a rare and add the modifier that's stated. So it might be a few different modifiers. Some of them we saw were adding fire damage to weapons. Some of them we saw were adding either strength, dex, or intelligence. So there's still a little bit of randomization there, but it's much more clear what you're going to be getting out of those. And then at higher tiers, they're going to act like chaos orbs instead, and again, be very much more deterministic. And in terms of your more base currencies, they're making changes to transmutation, augmentation, regal, exaltant, chaos orbs, with all of these now dropping in different tiers. So transmutation orbs, for example, coming in at 3 different tiers, which will grant modifiers with a specific minimum modifier level. So pulling numbers out of thin air here, if the first level was to give you 10% cold resist, the second might give you a minimum modifier of 20%, and the third level might give you a minimum modifier of 30%. Those numbers I've pulled out of my ass, but that's to give you an idea about how that's going to work. So essentially, as you move through the campaign, using the higher tiers will be better for you because there's a higher chance of a better roll in that respect, because it'll have a minimum that it can't fall below. And on top of that, we're now getting new items called exceptional items. These drop at normal rarity and are ideal for crafting. So they're trying to make crafting more deterministic and more available for players. And they can drop with quality up to 30%, as well as additional sockets, which can then be added and tweaked with Val to give you another socket. So yep, you can get 3 socket items there. And on top of that, we're going to be seeing new omens. We're going to be seeing a new currency called Hinakora's Lock, which will allow you to see the outcome of your next craft. They've really revamped crafting here, and I'm really curious to see how it works out, which is perfect because our last talking point here is trade. We are finally getting a trade system that is somewhat built in game. You still need to use the trade website, but you can now trade with players who are offline. You can now trade with players who are AFK, and you no longer need to come out of a map you're running to trade with another player, which is absolutely fantastic. So how it works now is you will meet an NPC during the axe. Her name is Ange. You can invite her to your hideout. You'll go over to Ange, place the items you want to sell in her inventory, set the price, and as it is done now, it'll automatically be posted on the trade website. Then, when a player buys your item, you will simply get a small notification, or you'll see in your hideout, Ange has an icon over her head, and she will have the currency that was to be paid to you. Now, if you're buying, you would simply go to the trade website, see the item you want, click secure, which will teleport you straight to that player's hideout in game, at which point you can talk to Ange and you can see that player's shop. So you can see everything they're selling, not just the one item you were looking for. You go in there, you take the item out, that'll take the currency out of your inventory, and you're done. So it is really simplified trade. And for those of you that previously bought premium stash tabs to use in trade, you can swap those over to now merchant stash tabs on the PoE 2 website. This will only work if you bought those premium tabs before the release of this update, which is fine. This update doesn't come out for another week. So if you have bought those tabs, you can swap them over there. Otherwise, I imagine they're going to make it available so you can buy more that are specific to the merchant. And look, guys, that is my brief 20-minute overview of the reveal. It was so information dense. I've actually left out quite a lot of information. So if you're dying for more, that is going to be your best place to find it. It really feels like Grinding Games listened to their community after Dawn of the Hunt. I think that was quite a wake-up call for them, that the game wasn't quite jiving as well as Grinding Games hoped with the player base. There was still a lot of kind of jank, a lot of those quality of life fixes that we're now seeing coming in with the Third Edict. It sounds like they've kind of taken a step back, looked at the community as a whole, and really started to implement a lot of the changes that people have been asking for. So I'm really curious to see how this will land. Let me know in the comments as well what you think. Is this hitting what you wanted? Are you disappointed there's no new class this update? What are your thoughts on this as a whole? Otherwise, I hope this has helped. I hope it's given you a good summary. We haven't seen another class here, but the amount of small quality of life improvements and small buffs that are being kind of captured across the board, I think are really going to improve the campaign and leveling experience. I think what they've done here is provide a lot of really, really small passive buffs that may not really be noticeable right now, but I imagine the feel of the game is going to feel smoother, it's going to feel more intuitive, and I think all around it's going to be an improved experience. At least that's what I'm hoping for. And given the changes to minions, I know exactly what build I'm going for day one. I'm going to be going for a Zoomancer, maybe mix in a little bit of cold. Let me know in the comments, what build are you aiming for in Path of Exile 2, the Third Edict? What's going to be the first character you run? I cannot wait to jump in next week. It's going to be an absolute blast. Thank you so much for checking out this video. If you've enjoyed it, hit the like button, subscribe if you want to see even more gaming content. And if you're looking for something on top of that, I stream right here on YouTube and Twitch every Tuesday and Thursday, 4 PM Australian Western Standard Time. Feel free to come hang out. We like playing all kinds of games. Until then, guys, have a good one, and I'll see you next time. Cheers.